So welcome back. Now we are ready to move on with lecture 4 and start basically describing how protocols work and try to find attacks, and at the end of the video basically being able to have a secure version of a protocol, right? Before we dive into the technical stuff, basically some words about key distribution. So by now, I hope you have already understood that key distribution basically is one of the, let's say, fundamental problems of cryptography. There are a number of solutions. Now, which solution someone would choose, it really depends on the overall system, right? Nevertheless, we have three main ways of distributing keys. Now, the first one is the physical distribution, where basically we use trusted couriers, or anyway, in some other cases, let's say even armed guards, where keys can be distributed using the traditional physical means. Now, until the 70s, this was in effect the only secure way of distributing keys at system setup. It has a large number of physical problems associated with it, as you can understand, I guess, especially scalability, but the main drawback is that the security of the overall mechanism does not longer rest with the key, but with the actual courier, with the guy that is distributing the key, right? So imagine that if you could, for example, bribe the courier, basically then you immediately break the system, right? Good. Now, apart from the physical distribution, we've got the distribution using symmetric key protocols, where what we have there is that we have, okay, two users, let's say, and we have a trusted authority, a trusted central authority, and we can use this trusted authority to help generate keys for any pair of user as the need arises, right? So we've got an entity that we trust unconditionally, and then each user that wishes to get a key or exchange a key with another user, then basically needs to do that by contacting the central trusted authority. Now, protocols to perform this task will be discussed basically in this video. So all the protocols that we will describe today will be based on distribution using symmetric keys, right? Now, these kind of protocols, they are usually very efficient because they're depending on they're using only symmetric key encryption, but they have some drawbacks. More precisely, they usually assume that both the trusted authority and the users who wish to agree on the key are both online simultaneously, and apart from that, they also still require a physical means to set up the initial keys. This will become more clear in a few slides from now. And finally, we've got the distribution using public key protocol. So in this setting, two parties who have never met or who do not trust any single authority, like in the previous case, they can produce a shared secret key. This can be done in an online manner using a key exchange protocol. Now, indeed, this is the most common application of public key techniques for encryption. So keep in mind that rather than encrypting large amounts of data by public key techniques, we agree on a key by public key techniques, and then we use symmetric ciphers to actually do the encryption of our data. Now, this methodology is called hybrid encryption. We will use an example on lecture 6, I think, for example, TLS, how both public key encryption and symmetric key encryption are used in one protocol, right? So usually we use public key encryption just to establish a key, a symmetric key, and then we use that symmetric key in order to encrypt our data. Right, now, to understand the scale of the problem of key distribution, basically, just imagine if you have, let's say, a small university with around 10,000 students, and each student may wish to communicate securely with any other student in the university, right? So now, in such a system, you would need to have around 50 million separate secret keys. Now, with a large number of keys in existence, one finds a large number of problems immediately, right? So, for example, what happens when your key is compromised? For example, when a student is no longer a student, he's graduating, then his key should be revoked, right? Now, what can you do about it? What can they do? So hence, basically a large number of keys produce a large key management issue, right? Now, one solution is for each user to hold only one key with which they communicate with a central authority, and then the system would only require n keys. Imagine that if Alice wishes to communicate with Bob, Alice has her own key, Bob has his own key. Then what they will do is that basically Alice will contact the central authority. The central authority will help Alice to communicate to Bob by using what we call a session key, a temporary key. So this central authority will help to users generate a temporary key just to communicate for a short time. And this is basically the kind of protocol that we will try to examine today. Now, types of keys. So basically, we've got two main types of keys. The first one is the static, or also known as long-term keys. So these are keys which are to be used for a long time period. Now, the exact definition of long will basically depend on the underlying application, but this could mean from a few hours to a few years. Now, the compromising of a static key is usually considered to be a major problem with potentially, let's say, catastrophic consequences. Now, for the rest of this course, we will always assume that the static key, the long-term keys, will never be compromised, right? Now, apart from the static keys, we've got the session keys, or known as short-term keys or ephemeral keys. Now, these are keys which have a short lifetime, maybe a few seconds or a day. Now, they are usually used to provide just confidentiality for a given time period, right? Now, the compromising of a session key should only result in the compromising of that session's secrecy, and it should not affect the long-term security of the system. That's very important. So, if compromises a session key, this should not affect the long-term security of the system. Right now, in the examples that we will start seeing today, we will assume that if under certain circumstances she can compromise the session key. Nevertheless, keep in mind she can never compromise the long-term keys, right? So this is a kind of deal that we have to do in order to move on. Good. And the last slide with text. So some things about authentication servers. So if two users, Alice and Bob, that have never met before, they wish to communicate securely, they can do so through an authentication server. AES. Now, an AES is like a name registration authority who maintains a database with the principals it serves, and it can deliver identifying information computed from a key which is shared with each principal. Now, an authentication server is trusted by principals to always behave honestly, and this is known as a TTP, trusted third party, and from now on we'll call him Trent for short. So we have Alice, Bob, Eve, and Trent, the trusted guy. Now, for simplicity, we'll assume that Alice and Bob, they share the same authentication server. Hence, Alice and Bob share the keys KAT and KBT with Trent correspondingly. So Alice shares the key KAT with Trent, a symmetric key, and Bob shares the key KBT with Trent, which means that Trent knows both KAT and KBT. However, Alice, she doesn't have access to KBT, and Bob doesn't have access to KAT, and so on, right? So only Trent knows everything. Now, in reality, there are many authentication servers, and they serve different network realms. We'll see an example of such a protocol that it uses different AESs. This is Kerberos. We'll see this on lecture 6, I think. Good, so let's start then. From Alice to Bob. So in this scenario, you're Alice, and what you want to do, basically, you want to establish a key to securely communicate with Bob. Basically, you need to establish a short-term key, a session key, right? So how would you do that? So we've got Alice and Bob, right? You are Alice. How can you establish a secure key? Now, for this video, imagine that we don't know about asymmetric crypto. We don't know about public keys. Okay, so we don't know about public-private keys. We only have symmetric key cryptography in our hands. So what can we do, right? So in first place, I would suggest, because there is no magical way to solve this problem like by directly communicating to each other, these two guys, Alice and Bob. So basically what I suggest is that we put Trent in the middle, right? So we have Trent, the trusted authority, the TTP in the middle, that will be receiving messages from both Alice and Bob, okay, depending on the scenario. So now that we have Trent, immediately we can assume that Alice has shared KAT with Trent, a symmetric key that is only known to Alice and Trent, and Bob has shared KBT with Trent. Good. So what would you do? In such a scenario, I mean, you can imagine what would you do in real life, right? So you need to contact Trent and say that you would like to contact Bob, right? Now, what you want to contact Bob for, first of all, you need to establish a key, right? So it's good if you can also send the key. Now, you don't want anyone else to see that key apart from Trent and Bob, right? So the first message that Alice would construct and send to Bob is something like that. So, hello, I'm Alice. This stands for A, her identity. I would like to communicate with Bob. Here's his identity, B. And here is the session key K that I generated to send to Bob. And this K, this will be the short-term key that Alice and Bob will eventually use in order to encrypt all of their future communication, right? For a short time, of course. So keep in mind that this key is encrypted with KAT, right? With the key that Alice is sharing with Trent. So Eve, who is looking at the exchange messages, she can see A and B, so she knows that Alice wants to communicate with Bob, but she cannot tell anything about the secret information that Alice is going to send to Bob, which is our session key K. And she can't tell anything about that K because she doesn't have access to KAT, right? Good. Upon reception, what would Trent do? So the first thing would do is that, okay, seeing the identity of the sender, which is A, Alice, so he knows that for the last part of the message, he needs to use the key that he is sharing with Alice, and this is KAT. So he knows how to decrypt the last part of the message. And then he would look at the recipient of the message, which is Bob. So he knows that this message needs to go to Bob. And to do so, because the last part of the message contains some kind of secret, Trent will have to secure that part. So Trent decrypts this part with KAT, uses KBT to encrypt it, and sends to Bob the following. Hello, Bob. Alice would like to communicate with you, and here is the session key that she generated for you, right? So upon reception, Bob uses KBT to decrypt the last part, find out the session key that Alice generated, and then he can use that key K to communicate with Alice securely. So he sends a message to Alice saying, "Hi Alice, this is Bob," and this message will be encrypted with K, right? The session key. Now, this protocol is for authenticated key establishment, right? So the summary is that Alice generates a key K at random, encrypts it with KAT, and sends it to Trent together with the names Alice and Bob. Now, upon reception, Trent recovers K and encrypts it with KBT, which he forwards to Bob. Upon reception, Bob decrypts K and uses it to send an encrypted message to Alice. Now, what I would do now, I mean, guys, keep in mind that this part of the course is really interactive, an interactive one, right? So I keep stop and ask him questions, and basically I don't move on until I get an answer, even if it's not the correct one. Unfortunately, with the pre-recorded videos, you cannot do this. But anyway, what I suggest is that in each of these scenarios that you will be seeing now, you should stop and start thinking on your own if something is wrong here. So in this scenario, please try to think what's going wrong. I mean, obviously, this is a really bad protocol, the really bad design. It has several flaws, and it would be good if you can stop the video and try to find some of the flaws. Good. Now, apart from the flaws that you will start seeing later in the next slide, basically, there is also something bad in that protocol. Basically, there is an undesirable feature, and this undesirable feature is that the key is basically generated by Alice, right? So what I want to say is that who tells you that Alice will generate a good key? And what does good mean? For example, it means that it will be a fully random key, right? Or make sure that it will not be a key that was generated in the past or used in the past, or it will be a key that will be long enough, right? So who tells you that? No one, right? I mean, maybe Alice will do everything correctly, but maybe not. You don't know. So the only entity that both Alice and Bob trust in this scenario is Trent. So Bob does not have to trust Alice, and vice versa. Alice does not have to trust Bob. So nevertheless, both of them, they trust Trent, right? So any secret information that is generated and will be used from both parties, Alice and Bob, it should be generated by the only trusted entity in this scenario, which is Trent, right, and not Alice. So the undesirable feature is that Alice is generating the secret when it should be Trent, the one who would generate that. Good. So let's try to fix this. So let's have the same protocol, but session key from Trent now. Okay, so the session key should be generated by Trent. So Alice would contact again Trent saying, hello, I'm Alice and I would like to communicate with Bob. So the only difference from the previous first message is that Alice does not send the encrypted version of K, right? So she only sends her identity and Bob's identity, A and B. Upon reception, basically, what would Trent do is that he knows that Alice wishes to communicate with Bob, so he would generate a key K, right, locally, Trent, and then he would encrypt that K with KAT and KBT and would send this to Alice. Now, Alice can take the first part of the message, decrypt it and find out K, but what can she do with the second part of the message, which is encrypted with KBT? Basically nothing. I mean, she doesn't have access to KBT. However, she knows that this contains the same information as the first part of the message, right? So both parts, they contain an encrypted version of K. The first part is something that Alice can decrypt, while the second part can be decrypted only by Bob and Trent, right? So Alice wishes to exchange this key with Bob. So basically, the only thing that she will do is that she will contact Bob saying, hi, Bob, this is Alice. I've got something that Trent generated for you. And this is the third part of the message, right? Upon reception, Bob knows that he needs to use KBT to decrypt that last part of the message, because this is what the first identity says here, Trent. So upon reception, Bob decrypts K, decrypts the last part of the message, recovers K, and then contacts Alice saying, hi Alice, this is Bob, and this would be basically encrypted with the session key that was generated by Trent in the second step of the message of the protocol. Now, in the second message, I mean, Trent could have just contacted Bob and sent this to Bob, right? But this wouldn't be that efficient. Now, this is the same protocol as before, but now the trusted server is responsible for generating the session key K. This protocol is a fictional one. Its purpose is to illustrate a recurring theme in protocol design, which is attack, fix, attack, fix. Now the attacks, keep in mind that should not be on the encryption schemes, right? So let's see an attack. Again, here I suggest guys that you stop, you write down the protocol on your own, and you try to examine all the messages and start thinking like if. So put if in the middle and see what you could do, okay, to fool either Alice or Bob. Okay, good. Let's see an attack now. So the previous protocol is flawed because information about who should get the session key is not protected. So Eve intercepts some messages and impersonates principals. Right, so let's see again what's going on. So we've got Alice. The protocol starts by Alice sending a message to Trent saying, "Hi, I'm Alice and I would like to communicate with Bob," right? Now imagine that we've got our malicious adversary Eve in the middle, that she intercepts that message, right? And what she can do, I mean, the first thing that someone could think is just change this Alice to Eve, but would that make any sense? I mean, based on the Dolev-Yao protocol that we described in the previous videos, you know, Eve is a legitimate user, right? So no one knows that Eve is corrupted. So if Eve was just changing Alice's name to Eve, okay, Trent would get a message saying, "Okay, I'm Eve and I would like to communicate with Bob." No problem with that, right? The protocol would go on normally. So what Eve can do? So what she can do, since we already, you know, excluded the case of changing Alice's name to Eve, then what she could do is that basically she can say, "Hello, I'm Alice and I would like to communicate with Eve," right? So changing Bob's name to Eve's name. Now upon reception, TTP Trend, what would do is that it would generate again the session key K, and instead of encrypting it with KAT and KBT, he would encrypt it with KAT for Alice, which is the first principal in that message, and with KET, right? With KET, which is the symmetric key that Trent shares with the legitimate user Eve, right? So remember, Eve is a legitimate user, which means that she also shares a secret key, a symmetric key with Trent, KET. Upon reception, Alice, poor Alice, basically does not have any kind of mechanism to verify that this part of the message, the second part of the message that was sent by Trent, is something that is encrypted with KET and not with KBT, as Alice would expect, right? So what she is doing is basically she would follow the protocol properly. So it would generate a message saying, "Hi, I'm Alice. You've got something from Trent," and she will send this part. Now, while she thinks that she's sending this to Bob, basically she's sending it to Eve. Eve, she intercepts the message. She knows how to decrypt this part that contains the session key because she knows KET, and basically that's it. She gets access to K, to the session key, and then she can contact Alice and pretend that she's Bob, sending her the message, "Hi Alice, this is Bob," and this message would be encrypted with K. So Alice would be fooled because she thinks that only Bob and Trent knows K, and since Trent is a TTP is fully trusted, then you know he wouldn't do any harm, he wouldn't do any malicious anything malicious. So basically, this method, Alice thinks that it should have been sent by Bob. Well, in reality, it is sent by Eve. Good. I hope you understood the attack. If not, please, again, it's very good if you just try to write it down on your own and understand exactly all the steps that Eve is taking to perform this attack, to launch that attack. Good. So let's describe it a bit more, though. So in the attack, the first message that goes from Alice to Trent and says, "Hi, I'm Alice, I would like to communicate with Bob," is intercepted by Eve, who changes it to, "Alice, I'm Alice and I want to communicate with Eve," right? Now, this is possible, as we already said, according to the Dolev-Yao thread model, and doing so, if she has effectively full trend who follows the protocol to generate a key for her and Alice. At the end, Alice thinks that she is sharing a key with Bob, while in reality, she's sharing the key with Eve. Now, this attack was made possible because Bob's identity was sending clear in the first message, right? So imagine that if this was not clear, maybe it would be a bit more difficult for Eve to do that attack, right? Now, so let's fix it by treating Bob's identity as a secret and encrypting it with a key shared by Alice and Trent, right? So what I'm saying is that we will encrypt that part of the message here, Bob's identity. Of course, we will encrypt it with the key that Alice, the sender, has shared with Trent, right, with K18. Okay, so let's go. Session key from Trent version 2.0. Again, Alice contacts Trent saying, "Hello, I'm Alice and I would like to communicate with Bob." However, in this time, Bob's identity is encrypted with KAT, the key that Alice is sharing with Trent. Good. Now, upon reception, Trent knows that in order to decrypt the second part of the message that contains the recipient's identity in an encrypted form, he would have to use KAT because it is known from the first part of the message, which says that the sender is Alice. Good. So upon reception, Trent basically decrypts Bob's identity and then generates the session key K that is sent back to Alice, right? So the rest of the protocol is the same as you can see here. So Trent will generate the message containing the session key encrypted with KAT and encrypted with KBT and will send this to Alice. Upon reception, Alice will decrypt her part, the first part of the message, and will forward the other part to Bob, who, upon reception of that message, Bob knows that he needs to use KBT because Trent's identity is here in order to find the session key K and then communicate with Alice securely by saying, "Hi, Alice, this is Bob," encrypted with K. Good. Any problem here? Again, guys, please stop the video, write down again the slightly updated protocol and try to find if there is something wrong or not. Now, an attack. So what would Eve can do? So Eve intercepts the first message, okay, that contains again the two identities, one in clear text, one in ciphertext. And what she will send is that, again, she will replace Bob's identity with hers identity. But how can she do that? I mean, she doesn't. We already said that the long-term keys like KAT cannot be compromised, right? So Eve does not know KAT, right? Which means that she cannot basically encrypt her identity with KAT. Good. So Eve basically obtained this part from a previous correct run of the protocol between her and Alice. So imagine that at some point Alice ran this protocol in order to communicate with the legitimate user Eve, right? So if Alice did that, the first message would have been from Alice to Trent saying, "Hello, I'm Alice and I would like to communicate with Eve," and that Eve there would have been encrypted with KAT, right? So there was a proper legitimate run of the protocol between Alice and Eve in the past, and Eve stored that part of the protocol where contained an encrypted version of her identity, the encrypted version of her identity, stored it in order to reuse it later. And that's what she does here, right? So she replaces EKAT of Bob with her identity encrypted with KAT. Now, there is also another attack on the second message where Eve can impersonate Trent. Do you see it? So please try. So let's try to fix this, right? And yeah, this takes us basically to session key from trend version 3.0. So the previous attacks basically were made possible because Eve could alter protocol messages without any detection, right? So this suggests that we need to have a scheme based on hash functions. Do you remember on lecture, I can't remember, I think it was lecture 2, we talked about cryptographic hash functions, and we said that, you know, we are going to use them in order to provide integrity of our messages. So this was the problem here, right? So in the previous slide, in the previous attack, basically Eve could change the identity of Bob with hers, okay? And neither Trent or Alice had any kind of mechanism on their hands with which they could see that the received message has not been integrity protected, right? So something is wrong, right? So now we will try to use hash functions to protect the integrity of the messages. So the first message that you would send comes from Alice to Trent and saying, "Hello, I'm Alice. I would like to communicate with Bob." And all of a surprise, now it's everything in clear text, right? So it's like doing some step backwards, like we're back on version 1.0 of the protocol. So Alice sends this to Trent. Now, upon reception, what would Trent do? So again, here I would suggest that you stop and think about it. So you already have a clue saying, you know, you have a good tip saying that you need to use hash functions in order to protect the integrity. And you know that in the previous attack, our malicious adversary Eve tried to change one of the identities, and by doing this, she managed to fool Alice, right? So pause the video and think about it on your own. Assuming that you have done that, let's move on. So Trent will generate the following message and send it to Alice. So she would generate again an encrypted version of K, like the session key that Trent generates. So this K would be again encrypted with KAT and with KBT. But apart from that, these encrypted versions of K would be followed by two hashes. So the first hash would be the sender's ID with the session key, like concatenated. So Alice's ID concatenated with the session key that Trent generated. And another hash that would contain similarly Bob's identity concatenated with the session key that Trent generated, right? Now, I split this into two, let's say, distinct messages so that you know that one of them goes to Alice, obviously, while the other one goes mainly to Bob, right? Now, what would you do when you receive these two messages if you are Alice? So the first thing that you would do is to find out basically the session key, right? If you don't do this, then you cannot process the hashes that you received. So the first thing that you must do is you need to decrypt that part, KAT. And once you do that, you find out K. And then what you can do with these two hashes is that you can verify them. And what can you actually verify is that, first of all, you know both identities, Alice and Bob, the sender and the receiver, right? And you also know K. So you know Alice, you know Bob, and you know K, which means that you can, and you also know the hash function that Trent, the cryptographic hash function that Trent used in order to calculate those hashes. So basically, you can calculate those hashes on your own and check if they are the same with the ones that you received that were sent from Trent, right? And if they are equal, everything is good. If they are not equal, it means that someone changed something en route. Good. So what Alice is doing is that she decrypts K and then she calculates the hash of Alice concatenated with K, checks if the two hashes are equal, and then if they are equal, then he calculates the hash of Bob concatenated with K, if checks again if the two hashes are equal. If they are equal, everything's good, and she moves on to the second part of the message, which is basically contacting Bob and saying, "Hey Bob, you've got something from Trent. I'm Alice as well, so somewhere here, yeah. And here is the session key. So Bob basically, upon reception, knows that he needs to use KBT to decrypt this part, finds out K, then calculates the hash of Bob concatenated with K. If the two hashes are equal, everything is good, and then he contacts basically Alice by saying, "Hi, I'm Alice. Hi, Alice. I'm Bob," and this would be encrypted with K, right? Now, I hope you understand the trick that we did here with the hashes and how we solve it. So imagine that if Eve was changing Alice's identity here, Bob's identity here, then the verification process wouldn't work, right? Because either Alice or Bob, when they try to calculate this hash, which is hash of Bob concatenated with K, wouldn't work because the hash that Trent would have generated would have been hash of Eve concatenated with K. However, Alice knows that she wants to communicate with Bob, and Bob knows his actual name, which is Bob, right? Good. Now, do you see any issue here? Again, the same advice, please stop and try to find any flaws to see if something is going wrong here. So what Eve can do is that she can replay the second message of an old run which had the time to compromise the session key. So nothing guarantees the freshness of the messages here, okay? And that's bad. So as we said earlier when we briefly described the two types of keys that we've got, the short term and the long term, we said that the long term keys like KAT and KBT will never be compromised. I mean, for the needs of the course at least, while the session keys, under certain circumstances, they can be compromised, and that's a legitimate scenario, a valid scenario. So Eve can basically compromise an old session key when she had all the time to do so. So we assume that Eve, at some point, she can replay the second message from an old run of the protocol, which had the time to compromise the session key. And this is possible because nothing guarantees the freshness of the message. So nothing says here to Alice or to Bob that the message that you received and contains those keys here are fresh. So let's try to fix this. So in order to fix this, we need to have some kind of a challenge response authentication protocol. So there are many methods to ensure that a message is not a replay of an old message, right? One well-known method is called challenge response authentication, or handshake. Now, one party sends a challenge message and the second party sends a response in a pre-agreed manner that indicates freshness. Usually, there is a time constraint as well. So if the response does not arrive on time, the authentication immediately fails. Now, the challenge response mechanisms can be achieved with nonces, which are random numbers, and they are only used once, timestamps, and sequence numbers, right? So sequence numbers is, timestamp is just the time from your machine, right? So every time that you send a message, you also attach the time from machine's local clock, right? While the sequence numbers is like, we have agreed that I will send you, for example, number n, you will have to reply to me by sending me n plus 1. I have to reply to your message, then you expect that I would send you n plus 2, n plus 1 plus 1, right? And so on and so forth. And this is also what we mean here in a pre-agreed manner here. So send a response in a pre-agreed manner that indicates freshness. Good. So let's see a well-known protocol, Needham-Schroeder protocol that was published in 1978. So again, we have the same scenario. Alice wishes to establish a secure key with her friend Bob. Now Alice will contact Trent and say, "Hello, I'm Alice. I would like to contact Bob, and here is a nonce, a random number n that I generated, to make sure that our messages will be fresh," right? Upon reception, what would Trent do? Now you have n here, right? So think, what would you do with that, right? Again, pause the video and do this. Now, in the version of the protocol that was published by Needham and Schroeder, Trent was replying to Alice by sending a message, a long message that is encrypted with K18 and contains N, the nonce, K, the session key that is generated again by Trent, Bob's identity, and an encrypted version of K and Alice's identity with KBT, right? So this encrypted message also contains another encrypted part inside it, which needs to go to Bob, right? Obviously, because it's encrypted with KBT and Alice doesn't know what to do with that, right? So what would you do if you were Alice? I mean, obviously there's only one message that contains lots of stuff. So the first thing that you need to do is to decrypt this, right? And by decrypting this, the first thing you do is you check if that message contains the same nonce that you send in the previous message to Trent. Now, if the nonce is the same, then you check K, right? And you get basically access to the session key that was generated by Trent for you and Bob. And then you also verify that Trent got Bob's identity correctly. So no one basically changed Bob's identity or the nonce, right? And obviously no one changed Alice's identity because you received that and this is encrypted with K18. Good. So then you can be sure that this part also that goes to Bob contains your name, your identity there. Now what would you do is that probably you would forward that back to Bob, right? And yes, that's what the protocol was saying. So Alice would contact Bob saying, hello, Trent generated something from you, so that Bob knows that he needs to use KBT to decrypt that part. So Bob decrypts this. He finds out that Alice wants to talk with him, and also he gets access, he gets to recover K, the session key that Trent generated for both Alice and Bob. And finally, basically the same thing, Bob will use K to communicate with Alice and say, hi Alice, this is Bob. Here is the nonce basically that you generated here's in first place. Okay, and so obviously here Alice would have to send the nonce as well. And yeah, sorry about that. And then Bob basically sends a new message encrypted with a fresh nonce n prime, let's say, to Alice, and then Alice, upon reception, replies back to Bob by saying, "Hi Bob, this is Alice. Here is n prime minus 1, right? The nonce that you generated for me minus 1." Good. So that's how Needham-Schroeder protocol works. So do you see any problem here? So this is what I meant in one of the first slides of the previous video when I described the goals for this lecture and the next one, that we will become familiar with one common phenomenon, which is that even protocols that they have been described by experts, they tend to have flaws, right? So this protocol is not secure. So this protocol is vulnerable to an attack discovered by Denning and Sacco in 1981, where what Eve can do is that she intercepts message 3 and 4 and 5 and replaces them with her own version, right? So let's see how this works. So Alice contacts Trent saying, hello, I'm Alice, I would like to contact Bob, here is a nonce. And Trent would reply back by sending this encrypted long message with K18. Now, upon reception, Alice would do all the verification, all the processing that we described earlier, and would contact Bob by saying, "Hi, Trent has generated something for you, and this is this part, which is encrypted with KBT and contains Alice's name, concatenate, and the session key." Good. But now this message would be intercepted by our malicious adversary Eve, right? what she can do is that basically she can forward another message to Bob, okay, that contains Trent's name and an information that is encrypted with KBT, contains a K prime, a session key different than the key that was generated by Trent in that run of the protocol, as well as Alice's name, right? So the thing is, how can she do that? If again, she can do that because she has this from an old run of the protocol where she had the time to break the session key K prime that was established between Alice and Bob. And now basically she can reply this to Bob, and then Bob will end up using K prime. So here it should have been K prime to encrypt his messages. So basically he will decrypt this part of the message, find out K prime, and then he will start using K prime, and he would think that he will start communicating with Alice, while in reality he would have been communicating with Eve, right? So Eve can run the protocol properly because he has access to K prime, and all of these messages from now on are encrypted with K prime, right? So in the attack, Eve blocks Alice's third message and injects her own, which is a replay of an old run. Since she had all the time to break the old session key, she manages to fool Bob, right? I know it might sound a bit strange in the first time that you see it, so please try to think about it, how Eve basically manages to fool Bob. Now, let's try to fix this by using timestamps this time, right? So in the previous protocol, although Alice is sure that Trent is alive since he sends back her nonce, Bob has no evidence of entity authentication regarding Trent's liveness. So Denning and Sacco, the guys that they found the attack, they suggested the use of timestamps to authenticate Trent to Bob without adding any extra messages, so without making the protocol less efficient, let's say. So Alice is communicating with Trent, saying, "Hi, I'm Alice. I would like to communicate with Bob. Here is a nonce." Now, Trent would reply back to Alice by saying, "Okay, here's an encrypted version of a message with all the entire message again is encrypted with KAT, and now it contains a timestamp key, the secret key, the session key K, Bob's identity, and the last part which goes to Bob because it's encrypted with KBT. And instead of just containing K and Alice, like in the original version of the protocol, it also contains the timestamp T, the time that Trent sent that message, right? Now let's see how this would differentiate things, right? So upon reception, Alice basically finds all this, checks that everything is good, that Bob's identity is here, that he finds the session key K, checks that the timestamp and verifies that the timestamp means that the message is fresh, and so on. And then he contacts Bob by saying, "Okay, Bob, I have something from Trent that goes to you," and Bob would have to decrypt that by using KBT. Now, upon reception, Bob decrypts that part and sees that, okay, Alice wishes to communicate with him. Here is the session key and here is the timestamp. So basically this says that the message is fresh, right? And then the protocol goes on the same as in the original Needham-Schroeder protocol. Now, keep in mind that by having the timestamp here would make the previous attack impossible, just because if Eve would have replayed an old message containing EKBT, K prime, Alice, and another T prime, let's say, then upon reception, Bob would first check the timestamp and would see that this is an old message, right? So now he gets that message, he opens it, he first checks that the freshness of the message by looking that the timestamp is fresh. The time is now, basically, okay? The time that that message was sent was now, not like 2 years ago or a month ago or whatever, right? So he can check, verify the freshness of the message, and therefore the attack that we described earlier wouldn't have been possible. Good. So when Alice and Bob receive their message from Trent, they can verify they are not replaced by comparing the timestamp with their local clocks. Now, since T is encrypted, impersonation is not possible. Good. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed it. Guys, I really suggest that you write down all of the protocols step by step, and you try to understand exactly the messages that we followed from the first version of the protocol until the last one, right? It's pure logic, I mean, and you need to get familiar with all these things at some point. So that's how I would do it anyway, pen and paper. Okay, thanks a lot. See you later. Bye.